Hello and thank you very much for joining me for this lesson on the industry review for the November 24, February 25 SCS exam, which is based on the pre-seen Rotomyne. This is the second lesson within Unit B, which is the unit all about the pre-seen. Okay, so in this lesson what we're going to do is we're going to cover off 3 real-world examples of companies that are similar to Rotomyne, and then we're going to look at some industry callouts. Now, I don't believe that we should spend loads of time on industry analysis and industry review because the world of the pre-seen is what we should be most familiar with. However, I do believe it's important to spend some time doing some industry research because firstly, it helps us to understand the industry. It also helps us to ensure that our answers make sense within the context of the real world. And also it helps us to predict exam scenarios, which I'm sure you're all thinking about at the moment. So the first company we're going to run through here is Albemarle, and this is a American company. Okay, it's based in the USA, it's based in North Carolina, and it's the largest provider of electric vehicle batteries in the world as of 2020. Now, it has grown through international acquisitions and joint ventures, and this is something that you'll see within each of these examples, and I think this is something that we should focus on. Okay, so acquisitions, very much a financial strategy, enterprise strategy type of topic. If this is going on in the real world, well, likely we're going to have a question on acquisitions, maybe divestments. Joint ventures, I'm not sure how they would be tested. Perhaps we could have maybe a joint venture suggested and then we would have to review a proposal, perhaps something like that, maybe a joint venture with a state-owned company, something like that. This article is quite interesting, and you can actually click on the articles by downloading these slides and then clicking on that link. This one shows that the company is deeply affected by changes in the supply of lithium. And what we're talking about here specifically is the company's share price. So we can see share price volatility with this particular company in regards to changes in the supply of lithium. And actually recently the company's shares increased because a Chinese mining company said that they would mine less lithium in the coming period. Now, this particular company is under scrutiny for alleged environmental damage in Nevada. So there's only one lithium mine in the entire USA, and this company has it. Okay, it's in Nevada. And basically this article talks about drying up wells and so on and so forth. But the reason why I've included this is because it shows us that these companies are constantly being scrutinized for their environmental performance. Okay, you'll see articles all the time about these companies and the damage, the potential damage they can cause, the damage they have caused, fines and so on and so forth. And I think this could be a key theme within our exams. Okay, so maybe Rotomyne has perhaps caused some environmental damage, or maybe there's an accusation that it has. Okay, so maybe there's no evidence, but there's an accusation that it has by a pressure group perhaps. So the next company is SQM, and it is a Chilean business, and it has grown through international acquisitions and joint ventures. Okay, so just like the last company we looked at. Now, it was previously state-owned, but it became privatized in 1988, and quite interestingly, a primary shareholder here is the son-in-law of a former Chilean dictator, and actually this particular person, okay, his brother ended up being the CEO effectively. I think they called it vice president. So this company has had a lot of controversy in regards to political risk. Okay, so the interaction between the Chilean government and this company and this shareholder as well. Okay, so I've included this example because not only is it a big business and it's a primary player in the lithium extraction industry, it's also a business that has a lot of interaction with political risk. Okay, so if you do your own research, you'll find tons of articles about this business. What we need to know though is that for this type of business, managing political risk is really important, okay, because this business was actually fined by the US in regards to corruption. Okay, so there's an ongoing case in regards to corruption, but there's a proposed fine in place for this business. So this business is really interesting from the perspective of political risk. I think what this suggests to me anyways is that we could have some scenarios around political risk with the 2 mines that are located in the high risk countries within the pre-seen. Now, this is quite an interesting article. Again, it's to do with environmental damage. This one's a little bit more substantial than the last article, and it goes way further in detail. And actually, it talks about a complaint lodged by indigenous communities, which is a really interesting topic that I think could actually come up in your exam. So maybe we have this indigenous community. They're not so happy with brine mines. Okay, so it's deteriorating the landscape. It's affecting ecosystems, possibly their water supply, their ability to farm. And as a result, then they launch a complaint, and maybe we need to make a payment to them. And actually, this company has been in trouble in the past because it basically promised to make payments to indigenous communities, and those communities refused to take the payments, and then there was a stalemate. Okay, so really interesting. I think this could be a theme within the exam, if I'm being honest. So the next company is Jiangfeng, and this is a Chinese business. It's a huge lithium extraction business, and it produced 24% of the world's lithium hydroxide in 2020, which we know is used for lithium batteries. Now, it's also grown through international acquisitions and joint ventures, and this is quite interesting. And I think this could be a theme within our exam. So the company was actually affected by Mexico's nationalization of lithium. So Mexico introduced this program where they effectively nationalized lithium reserves, which means that it limits the amount of extraction that private businesses from other countries can do on those lithium reserves. Okay, so companies like Jiangfeng, they're very limited because obviously it's a Chinese business going into Mexico. And for this company, Jiangfeng, they actually acquired a Mexican business for the sake of mining lithium within Mexico. And now they're in a bit of a stalemate where it's likely the case that they're going to have to partner or have a joint venture with the Mexican state body that looks after lithium mining. So this could be a scenario perhaps where we have a nationalization of lithium reserves in one of the countries in which we operate, and then we have to deal with the government as a stakeholder. Now, this particular business is vulnerable to geopolitical actions and political risk because the Chinese government views lithium to be a key strategic resource. And as a result, there's always a risk that they may impose export restrictions in order to keep that lithium within the Chinese supply chain. Okay, so the Chinese government wants to ensure that they are leading the way in terms of electric vehicle manufacturing, and they certainly are at the moment. And so they may institute export controls in order to keep that lithium within China, to keep that industry going. Okay, so this is quite an interesting insight here. Now, there's not really much that we can discuss, okay? Once you see the diagrams, you'll get a general idea as to what's coming. So what I've done here is I've looked at the actual lithium pricing over the last 4 years, and I've compared this to the Rotomyne share price. And what I found quite interesting is that the trend is somewhat similar, okay? So we can see here that prices surged in 2022, which is somewhat similar to our share price here for Rotomyne. And then there's a drop off, okay? So there's a drop off. And we don't really know why Rotomyne's share price has increased and decreased. We're not 100% certain. But I believe it could be highly influenced by lithium demand, supply, and then, therefore pricing. So I think what this shows is that perhaps Rotomyne had, like every company in this industry, a big increase, okay, in lithium pricing, which it obviously profited from. And then when we see this pricing going down, we can see similar in Rotomyne because pricing is going down, we have less profits as a result. So it's likely the case that Rotomyne is heavily influenced by lithium pricing, okay? So some key takeaways from the real world industry. The first is lithium pricing. So pricing is heavily impacted by demand from electric vehicle manufacturers. So if there's a drop off in demand for electric vehicles, this is going to have an effect on companies like Rotomyne. The role of the government is hugely important. Okay, so the government has the ability to boost demand for lithium. And this actually happened in the United States with the US Inflation Reduction Act, where this act actually gave grants for electric vehicles, and that really helped boost demand for electric vehicles, which has the effect then of boosting demand for lithium. They can also restrict supply, okay, so they can control rights. We saw that with the Mexican government. Perhaps we could have that within our scenarios. Maybe an overseas government maybe nationalizes the reserves, and as a result, then they become protected, and it's a little bit more tricky for us to extract the lithium from those countries. Now, sustainability. So traditional brine mining can lead to a lot of issues, okay? So in the real world, it's heavily criticized for its effect on ecosystems. So, for example, in Chile, there's a noticeable reduction in flamingos as a result of brine mining. So I think we could see something like this within the exam where perhaps Rotomyne causes some damage, perhaps to the environment, maybe ecosystems, not 100% certain, but I think you could see a question where we have to repair our reputation, maybe deal with the capital markets as a result of complaints or fines and so on and so forth. And maybe there's actually a negotiation or an engagement required with the government. The use of AI is quite interesting in the real world. So there's a company called Cobalt Metals, and it is a startup organization that is actually funded by Bill Gates. And this business uses data from multiple sources, so geothermal, geochemical, uses satellite imagery, and it uses all this data, incorporates it within an AI model, and it's used to find reserves of lithium, for example, also nickel and copper and so on and so forth. And I think this could be a scenario within your exam. If I'm being honest with you, I could see this being used because it's a great way to test how a piece of software or how an innovative technology can affect the ecosystem of Rotomyne. So I could see something like this being used as well. CIMA like to test the valuation of startup businesses or businesses that are tough to value. So I could see that also being the case where maybe we look to buy a business like this. Now, the use of sodium ion is actually discussed within the pre-seen, and the pre-seen is pretty accurate in that it says that these types of batteries are cheaper to produce, sodium ion batteries, but they're also heavier. Okay. Now, within the real world, actually these batteries are being used in electric vehicles, and it's likely that this is going to increase in the future. So Chinese car manufacturers, for example, BYD, they've invested in developing sodium ion batteries for electric vehicles. It doesn't mean that they're going to displace lithium ion batteries, but it certainly is a cheaper way to produce batteries. And as a result, it'll likely help them create cheaper cars. So they may have within their portfolio a kind of budget brand that would use this type of battery. Now, recycling is quite interesting. It's actually discussed within the pre-seen as well. And the pre-seen kind of writes off recycling. It says that it's not really super feasible. In the real world, it is feasible, but it just needs some investment. Now, what isn't discussed in the pre-seen is, possible laws that may require businesses to recycle lithium. Okay, so I think that could also be a potential scenario within your exam. So recently in the EU, there was a law passed where battery manufacturers actually have to use at least 6% of recycled lithium in their batteries from 2031 onwards. Okay, so we could have a similar type of piece of legislation, rules, regulations being passed, possibly within Poland, something like that. And maybe then there's an opportunity to engage in the recycled lithium industry. Okay, so that could be one for Rotomyne to pursue. So that pretty much wraps up this lesson. Thank you so much for watching this one. And in the next lesson, we're going to go through some potential scenarios in detail.